guys for being here. Wow, it's a full, I didn't see from the seat back there. A full room here at what, 7:45 on a Thursday night. Thank you guys all for showing up. It's so nice to see you. I'm not going to keep you for too long. I wanted to talk to you about a topic that's very close to my heart, which is fandom. And we're going to talk a little bit about branding, building on Ghislaine and Valerie and Geraldine's presentation before. I'm so sorry, I had a mind blank there. I'm going to take you back to a little bit of the start. My start as an academic. I did my dissertation in 1995. Toy Story was the #1 movie at the box office. As you can see, some things are still constant. Brad Pitt was the sexiest man alive then, as now, of course. The #1 search engine was Yahoo, actually, in 1995. Oh, you want me to be on camera?
Yeah, please, sorry.
That's not going to happen very much, so I will try. But anybody know when Google came on site? When did Google start? 98. And anybody know what Google was called when it first started? Oops, that's mine. Backrub.
Oh, God.
It was called Backrub originally. Anyways, this was me. This is the growth of the internet after 95. And PlayStation 1 was released. At that time, I had decided, after a little bit of time as a quantitative scholar, as a psychometric scholar, actually doing tests, to do a dissertation on Star Trek fans. Star Trek, The Next Generation, was the #1 show in syndication. It was a very exciting time for people who were fans. I was a fan since I was a kid. And I decided to study Star Trek, and I had a lot of support at the university where I was studying. One of the ways I studied it, if you saw the ethnography stuff before, was online. I actually started a web page to collect research. Now, this is not the actual look of the web page. The web page itself was black with like yellow text and white and blinking green parts. If you were back then, if you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. But anyways, I had all this information about Star Trek and people who had studied Star Trek before. And one of the scholars who had studied Star Trek before was a guy by the name of Henry Jenkins. He was really one of the earliest fan scholars. He wrote a book called Textual Poachers, which was about his dissertation work doing ethnography among Star Trek fans. And I had my page up for about 2 months, and then I get an email, and it's actually from Henry. Henry Jenkins actually found me through the website, which was celebrating his work on fandom, and said, if there's something I can do to help you, let me know. He was at MIT. He was a new professor at MIT. And I wrote back to Henry, and I said, you know, thank you so much for your thing. I would love to have you involved in my dissertation committee. So I asked my dissertation chair, Steve Arnold, can we bring on Henry Jenkins? He's great. I said, oh, that would be great, Rob. That'd be very exciting. So I asked Henry on, and Henry graciously agreed, and we started a correspondence. He was actually a pain in the ass, to be honest. He gave me 10 pages of single-spaced notes, correcting everything in my dissertation. He was a hard ass, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Henry. And we communicated on and off through the years. And then when Henry was working on his book, Convergence Culture, which some of you may know, this is his biggest book. It was a book that coined the term transmedia storytelling and started the whole transmedia branding thing. And Henry's a very big name. His first book coined the term participatory culture, which I'm going to talk about. But he kind of featured my work in Convergence Culture, and he had emailed me, and we talked back and forth. So we kind of renewed our correspondence. You know, years go by, right? The careers go on. And around 2013, Henry left MIT to go to sunnier climate and, you know, supposedly healthier air of California, and was working at USC, and they were recruiting for a new position, a research chair position, and he thought of me. And so they recruited me, and first time failed, second time I ended up saying yes. I brought my 2 sons to California, and they went to USC, and I started teaching at USC, and at the time, there was a course there, I believe it was called, I think it was called Transmedia Branding, actually. And I took it over and started teaching it with Henry. And we changed the name of it actually it should be Fan Relations, but I like Fandom Relations too. It's a PR course, $4.91. We started teaching it and developing what the content would be to think about this interface between marketing and public relations and what Henry, the field basically that Henry started, which is fandom studies, fan scholarship, studying fandom as a social phenomenon that makes a difference in the world. So we taught that twice, and then we were like, this stuff is like too good to like just be teaching. We should write this stuff up. And Henry's a very fast and prolific writer. I'm pretty fast myself. So we started working on a book, and it was going to be the book for the fan relations course. Now, as we're writing, the chapters are getting bigger and bigger, and we realized, you know what, maybe we have more than one book here. So it was like started off, and we had all these chapters, and each chapter, it looks like, is now going to become a book of its own. So the introductory chapter, which was chapter 1, has ended up becoming this book, which you just saw, which is Defining Fandom, which is the first of what's going to be, I think, a 15-book series that we're going to put out, each of them probably around that length. So we've got most of them already written. So I'm going to walk you through some of these ideas. But, you know, our approach to the whole book, and certainly our approach to defining fandom, has been very much autobiographical. So we kind of start with our own pasts as fans, our own histories as people who have a deep and passionate relationship with different elements of the media, and we talk about. So this is actually a picture I included in the book of me when I was 12 years old at a science fiction convention, drawn by one of the top science fiction artists. He's dead now, unfortunately, Frank Kelly Frias. So if you look him up online, he's a classic science fiction writer. Henry talks a little bit about his childhood. This is a picture of Henry as a kid with his Sokies figures that all come from different media figures. I trace my history, you know, the television shows that I loved and the music that I listened to, and it became a huge part of my life because for a while I wanted to be a musician. I was in a bunch of bands for about 6 years. And then into business school, into the PhD program, and studying fandom in a structured way. So we call this discipline of reflecting on yourself, but building theory from it. In sociology, they've developed this term of autoethnography. So kind of like a combination of an autobiography with ethnographic, social, cultural kinds of readings. And so that's really how the book starts. It starts with our discussion of ourselves as fans and then broadens out from there to think about the principles that we can develop by thinking about how fandom plays a role in people's lives. So, you know, as Henry and I were thinking about, you know, what this book that we wanted to write, which became the book series that we wanted to write, we really thought about it as a combination of two fields, right? And that's kind of, it started with the discussions around convergence culture. Because communications, which is Henry's native field, which gave birth to cultural studies, it tends to be a very anti-business field. They tend to be very skeptical about marketing, about marketers, about brands, to see this as a very exploitative relationship. Whereas in marketing and consumer research, it's very much more pro-business, it's you know, pro-branding. You can maybe write critical marketing in Europe, you can get away with that, but then you still have to go in the class and teach MBAs how to be better at selling dog food and toothpaste and shoes, right? So there's no kind of escape from it when you're a scholar in business. But there is in comm. It's interesting because the communications people, you know, they still drive nice cars and have nice clothes, but they get to write like they're different from everybody else, right? Well, Henry kind of refused that sort of orientation and was much more pro-business. He used to hold this meeting of entertainment industry and branding executives called Futures of Entertainment in Boston when he was at MIT. I was a part of his consortium there. So they were sort of open to the idea that brands might not be horrible and that marketing might not be the work of the devil. Whereas I, in marketing, was always super critical of marketing, as well as sort of, you know, open-minded about this, but always sort of looking at the skeptical side and the sustainability effects and all this other stuff. So we kind of met in this middle place anyway. So I did a cultural studies type of dissertation when I was doing Star Trek Henry, and Henry was really kind of learning about marketing through me. We thought about bringing these two ideas together, these two systems, these two ways of approaching scholarship in the world, and seeing what happened, basically. And that's kind of, we're reading and watching the results. So I think when we think about connecting a study of fandom and the orientation of marketing and consumer research, I think what we're really thinking about is, from a practical perspective, re-injecting and refocusing something that marketing may have started to lose, which is really this energy and youth and spirit. Now, that's a funny statement to make, because it seems like, marketing is kind of doing all this stuff, but really when you're doing marketing, like, I don't know how many of you are out there, how many of you are out there working in the world of marketing? Yeah? Does this look more like your day than this? Right? Which one looks more like the stuff that you have to deal with on your desk? Right? Is it that one or that one? Right? That's, what we see on the surface is the illusion of interesting things, right? But really in the world of marketing is about keeping up with platforms now. It's about automating as much as possible. It's about optimizing everything. It's about doing a lot of calculations about where you're going to squeeze the extra pennies out of people, right? And a lot of it is, following the latest trend on TikTok or chasing the currently biggest influencer, right? So we see our budgets growing, and we see a lot of metrics and influencers and companies doing their own meme campaigns, but we're also seeing much more consumer pushback. We're also seeing a lot of polarization around every campaign. We saw that in the other room when we were doing all our ethnographies on this virtue signaling of moral branding that's going on in the world. And people have got less and less attention. Everybody's swiping right constantly, right? There's no time for anything. And trust is eroding, right? Trust in brands is eroding. We know this. This is what private label brands are doing much better than they used to be. Right? People don't really trust the big brands anymore. So I think all this emphasis on automation and on dashboards and on quantifying every element of marketing is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? We've forgotten something very fundamental, I think, when we teach marketing, and certainly when we do marketing, which is that people aren't just buying for function. They're not just buying for price. They're also investing in a sense of wonder, right? People don't get the same sense of wonder from religion that they used to. They don't get the same sense of connection from neighborhood or from nationality that they used to. They're going elsewhere to fulfill these particular needs. And they're searching, always searching for a sense of meaning. I think when people are swiping right, when people are searching endlessly on their phones and looking, what are they looking for? They're looking for themselves, right? They're looking for meaning. They're looking for a sense of connection. So what fandom studies offers us is a recentering, a refocusing on human connection. Human connection in an age where we are saturated with media, right? But in an age where we also, as marketers, have to deal with a lot of big data and a lot of AI automation as well. So how do we think about that? Well, we just need to look around. Like, how does a marketer explain what happens with Taylor Swift, right? Taylor Swift goes, and her manager takes her old recordings, and she releases her own version of the recordings and tells her fans to stream only her stuff, and all of a sudden, there's this huge level of streaming of Taylor Swift stuff. What marketing theory explains that? What automation of a dashboard can handle that? It doesn't happen. It happens because people are highly connected to Taylor and highly connected to each other, watching each other, prompting each other, sharing information with each other, and doing it all to support their hero, right? Same thing's happening in K-pop. K-pop fans are competitively streaming stuff over and over. Some of them have several streams going at once so that they can boost up the ratings of their idols, right? Idol culture, and have them be #1, right? There's no marketing theory that accounts for this. There's no identity theory. Experimentally, this is going to be a hard one to handle, right? This is a cultural phenomenon. It's a connection phenomenon. How do you account for Star Trek, right? I started studying it in 1995. But they built a whole network, the Paramount Plus network, based on Star Trek, new Star Trek episodes being available to stream, right? So someone estimated how much Star Trek has contributed to the streaming market. And the estimate was $2.6 billion. $2.6 billion. The entire series itself cost something like, I think it was $17 million all in to create all 79 of those original episodes in the 1960s. So crazy return on investment, and it's still coming, right? This is a 60-year-old franchise that was able to create a network, right? It's a network. And look at what else. I mean, it's not an exception, right? It's in the theater here. Over 60 years old, the Mission Impossible franchise, still cranking out billion-dollar movies, right? What accounts for this? Great storytelling, yes, but also fan bases. So fandom is not something fringe anymore. And it's not just entertainment, right? It's certainly not just, it's not just sports. It's shoes, it's fashion, it's music, it's brands. There are brands. I've got brands on the cover here like Lego and Hello Kitty and, you know, all kinds of stuff. So it's printed all over everything. So fandom isn't just about the fan object itself. We call, you know, Taylor Swift is a fan object, Lego is a fan object, Led Zeppelin is a fan object, your rappers are fan objects, right? But it's not just about that, it's about the relationship. So the theory that we develop in the first book, as we're defining what fandom is we're trying to say, okay, there is a relationship between a person and a fan object, like a rapper, as I said, like a influencer hedgehog, like a form of music, like a brand of sneaker, right? Whatever it is, like a sports team, like a soccer team. I believe Paris had a little bit of a soccer excitement recently, right? This was a kind of a big football excitement. I'm sorry, not soccer here. Football excitement, right? So the relationship between a person and a fan object, that's called fanship, right? That passionate engagement between a person and a fan object, that's called fanship, right? When other people also have fanships, okay? Other people have fanships for the same fan object. When a person connects with another person and they share that relationship, this is the fandom, right? Fandom is the relationship between fans, right? Fans who are already passionately engaged with a fan object. That's the difference. So fandom is fanship plus the sociality, right? I say here, it's about geeking out together, right? Getting into this stuff together, being passionate about it together. And if we learn about fandoms, we see that they are built in specific ways, right? They have their own cultural architecture. They have their own symbols, things like memes, shipping, right? The kinds of relationship stuff that dedicated fans do. They have rituals like cosplay or unboxings or episode watches that can happen together. They have language. If you go online and you see people talking about any fandom, you'll see there's lots of insider terms. There's acronyms, there's actors, there's particular people that they focus on. Actors in a general way, not actors in a Hollywood sense, but a sports person can be a social actor as well. And then various different roles that people have, right? Like influencers or mods or creators or different kinds of gatekeepers. So there's a lot of structuring. So although fandom can look kind of chaotic, I think probably this is a picture that could have been in Paris a few days ago, right? It can look very chaotic from the outside. They have rules, right? And they are structured in a lot of ways. They have shared values, they have an internal logic. And from outside, it can be difficult to see that. But from inside, it's very obvious and apparent, and it's very, very enforced. Pierre Bourdieu, one of your great scholars and theorists, talks about cultural capital, right? Building capital based on a specific and specialized knowledge, right? Fandom is full of that. That's the currency of fandom, right? So if you know the stories, if you know the statistics, if you know the players, if you know the music, if you know the lyrics, if you know the story behind the rapper, right? Or if you know how to put together a 3,000-piece Lego kit without the instruction set, right? Then you're hardcore, right? Then you're an expert. People who have collections and have rare stuff. People who create memes. People who've been around for a long time, like me with Star Trek, right? For a long time. So these are the people who are like considered up. They have their own They own status ranking within communities. And they police values, right? There's a lot of this internal and external policing of values, watching each other, rating each other, knowing each other. And so we wrote in the book, fans care enough to set high expectations for the things they love. So the fact that things are really criticized in fandoms scares brands away, scares marketers away. They know they're going to be under the microscope. They know they're going to be looked at really carefully. But that's the downside of having that kind of devotion and loyalty. You've always got that. So fan investment is what causes both of those things. You can't have one without the other, right? It's a double-sided coin. So fans are constantly debating, they're demanding, they're rejecting, they're thinking about, is this real rap? Is this real Jay-Z? Is this latest album, is Kanye still Kanye? I say no, definitely not, right? That's not Kanye. That guy's somebody else. It's kind of like the Putin, the whole theory that Putin was replaced by a lookalike. I think that happened to Kanye too. That's my theory. So, what is canon? Canon is it the real story? Is this real Star Trek? Is Strange New Worlds real Star Trek? Does Spock, show those emotions and cry? Well, he did in the menagerie. He did in the cage, so why not on the show? Is it worthy of being called Star Trek? Or is this cringe? Right? Last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. Right? Cringe. Right? No one wants to talk about it. Please redo the last season at least, if not the last 2. Right? It's constantly, is it real? Is it good? Is it quality? Does it deserve to be called that? That's cultural capital. Right? That's policing. That's giving fans what to do and how to do it. And that's the secret really here, is fandoms run on being able to do stuff. So Henry Jenkins called this participatory culture. Now marketers don't like this because marketers want themselves to be the only ones doing stuff and they want to sell that to you, right? But there's something in marketing called co-creation. And co-creation means that marketers need to get used to the idea that they're giving people the tools to do things and then hands off. So fandom is full of these licensing fights, right? Star Trek fans posting images. Star Trek fans creating their own movies, right? Star Trek fans getting financing online through, what's the finance tool?
Kickstarter?
Kickstarter. Through Kickstarter, raising $500,000 in a week and then using that to produce their own Star Trek series. Well, Paramount didn't like that, so they shut them down, right? They stopped that. Then there's negotiations and this and that, but fans want to create. They want to make it their own. And there's always a battle there. So there's a lot of these tensions within marketing to fans that are really interesting. So Henry wrote about this early on. He said the key is to produce something that pulls people together, so that communal part, that connection, right? That mutual fanship that connects people, and gives them something to do. And the something to do part is what he's called participatory culture. There's a whole literature on participatory culture. I won't get into it here, but it's a very advanced literature. So, as we write, fandoms are some of the most passionate and connected, creative, critical, and active consumers. And in defining fandom, we talk about all of these different elements. That's why marketers should care. So, I told you I'm not going to keep you for too long. We're starting to wrap up here. A couple of mistakes that marketers make is thinking about short-term ROI, right? Those dashboards again. Short-term ROI is so much of what marketing is all about, but the big picture is a real genuine devotion, right? Real meaning-making, real human connection, and long-lasting cultural relevance. Maybe one of the reasons why our society is so superficial and so rapidly moving is because people they don't hang on to anything. They're not given anything to hang on to that's meaningful. When I talk to my friends, they're always into what's dropping next, the things that they can't have, not the things that they can have, a movie or the next series of a show, right? We just finished The Last of Us season 2. People were waiting for that. Andor season 2, right? And watching those drop once a week, right? House of Dragons coming up, right? If you're a Marvel fan, Fantastic Four is coming up, right? It's always what's next? And that's where the energy is in our culture, right? It's around those things that you can't have, that are difficult, that inspire this devotion, right, that have cultural relevance. And the second thing is marketers who jump on the bandwagon. There's a great piece, you can see it on YouTube, from 30 Rock years ago, of Steve Buscemi, who kind of comes into a school looking like this and saying, hey, how you doing, fellow kids, right? And that's basically how marketers generally approach subcultures and fan marketing, right? They jump on these trends without much knowledge of the history, and they do cringeworthy or tone-deaf things, and fans, I mean, they love to hate that stuff, right? So those are two big mistakes. But if we're going to think about marketing, what we want to do is move from just, messages and touch points and consumer journeys. They can be helpful, but really we need to think about what's going on behind the scenes in those touch points. The media making that's happening, the activity that's happening, the production by fans that's happening, the shared community building that's happening here. So 20 years ago, I wrote about brands as stories, right? And how characters have aura, and how brands all have an allegorical story, how they all take place in a setting that has some kind of usually utopian elements to it, and how there's always kind of a morality or a tension or a conflict involved, antinomy. And that's in my retro marketing article that's published with Stephen Brown and John Sherry in the Journal of Marketing 2003. So, thinking about world building, right? Creating whole areas for people to inhabit in their imagination is so much more powerful in a lot of ways. So I think we've never really needed to humanize and build community more than we do today, period, full stop. That's the statement. And I think marketing has a role in that communication. So do many other social institutions, but marketing certainly does, and that's the one we're talking about now. And I'll end with our good friend, the Mandalorian and Grogu, right? Fandom, this is the way. So that's the presentation. Now the commercial. So coming soon, like next week, is the second book in the series, Fandom as Audience, and stay tuned. Fandom as Consumer Collective is coming up. Fandom as Subculture is also coming up. You might want to check that one out. And Fandom as Devotion, but again, a lot more books as well. So these are all available on Amazon, on Kindle, and we're looking for translators who are interested in translating and writing an introduction in the native language. So if that's something that interests you, please approach me. Well, be careful what you ask for, because it's a job. For real.
I've done it professionally.
Okay, well, there we go. We're looking for professionals. And with that, I will say thank you so much.